everyone here in the digital classroom and both internationally connected through Zoom. We are glad to host the third day of Emerging Platform Society, and special thanks to Geraldine Roberti and Antonio Mascio, that are members of the Scientific Committee of the conference. Today's program is the third great keynote in our panel session. We will have Kornelia Hahn from University of Salzburg talking about augmented and reduced reality of consumption worlds. Then, after a short coffee break, we will go on the panel session presenting the monographic issue of the Opera Journal. And lately, 11:30, we will have a roundtable with all the authors of the Opera Journal. So I'm really glad to introduce you Kornelia Hahn, which is gonna present for us and deliver this keynote. Hi Kornelia, great to see you. We are glad and honored of having you here with us today, and we just can't wait to hear your keynote talk. So the floor is yours. Let me.
Thank you very much, Piergiorno, and buongiorno to everybody. And I'm very happy to be with you, even though only remotely. However, I'm very happy and I'm very pleased to talking about augmented and reused realities of consumption worlds. And also I would like to thank you very much, of course, for inviting me to this really very interesting conference. I'm observing remotely, and I had another short talk on Wednesday. I just want to make a quick remarks that since I had already talked on Wednesday, it is not that I want to promote the book I promoted on Wednesday. And my demonstrate to you in this keynote lecture is embedded into this approach. But maybe it is beneficial if I make this primarily remark that social digitalization is an approach I developed which goes beyond digital technology. So the idea is that I'm not being focused on digital technologies as they were invented in the, let's say, the last 20 to 30 years, but I'm focused, this is a social science theory, I'm focused on the social, on the digital logic. So this is my approach. I'm looking for digital logic, and my argument is that the digital logic was implemented already throughout modernity. This means it was already implemented since 150 years at least. And my second argument is that digital technology, as we know it today, could be easily and swiftly embedded into this social structure, which was already digitalized. And when I say that the social structure was already digitalized, this means more concretely that the settings, the interaction settings were already organized in a way that we can consider them as digital settings, even though our contemporary digital technology obviously was not introduced, but the settings themselves were already digitalized. And I want to maybe just to clarify it just quickly with this graphic. I do think that social digitalization, or digitalization, also technological digitalization in general, has a certain dynamic. So it goes, I mean, put it very simple, on and on and on. However, on an increasing level. So it is never always the same, but there are interactions coming into play. And when we look at the dynamic of social digitalization, I do think that primarily we can distinguish 3 strands of interaction. However, I mean, everything is combined, and this is what I want to show by these cogs here. The cogs are overlapping, and these only 2-dimensional graphic. So it means they work together. However, they don't work perfectly together. So they can also cause social problems. So this is why the cogs are not perfectly fit together on this graphic. So they work together, but the point is that they don't fit perfectly together. So they can cause, this unfit can cause a lot of social problems to us. However, just looking at these cogs, so I would like to distinguish 3 strands. And the one is called the discontinuous processing. So I do think that the digital logic, first of all, entails the digitization. And this means by digitization, I distinguish digitalization and digitization. By digitization, I mean that what is written inside this cog, that discrete abstract units are shaped. For example, this can be single files, these can be labor units, or these can be single commodities. And this is a process which renders things discontinuously, because you shape these discrete units, and this is why you make processing discontinuously. At the same time, you do need these units to streamline processes. This is why, this is the second cog, this is why I call it continuous processing. So for example, once you have single commodities, or you have what I was talking about on Wednesday, you have single packaged food or food preserves, food in can, and you can preserve it eternally, basically. You can easily transport it, you can easily handle it in the supermarket. So you can streamline this whole process of purchasing, and you actually achieve what is written on the second cog in the center, that you have a continuous processing, and you can programming. This is just another word for continuous processing. You can programming the way you want things going to happen. So for example, it can be what is written inside this cog. It can be a bureaucratic administration, which will be streamlined and more fluently, or it can be gastronomic services. This is what I want to talk about today. Or it can be also retailing procedures, as for example, if you sell canned food instead of fresh food. So the main part, this is, I mean, both discontinuous processing and continuous processing is what I regard as digitalization. However, when it comes to social digitalization, so a very important part, maybe not the main part, it is the third strand, and they all work together, as I said, but a very important part is that people dealing with this way of programming have to develop, or they necessarily develop, in the way this social digitalization is introduced, they develop a digital literacy. So by digital literacy, I don't just mean that they are able to use digital technology. What I mean is that they can understand and interpret processes which consist of discontinuous and continuous parts. So which consists of this interplay of discontinuous and continuous processing, what we see in the first 2 cogs. So they have to develop this ability, and I want to highlight that it is a compulsory kind of development, or you are just not able to do a lot of things in digital culture. You will be just cut off if you don't develop this digital literacy. And once you have developed it, so the task is for people to apply signifying practices according to the digital logic. And this means what is now written inside this COG. It is sense making and contextualization, and it is a co-programming I talked about on Wednesday. So I do want to see now these three terms, sense making, contextualization, and co-programming, as synonymous. So I don't want to discriminate today between them. And just to, highlight contextualization. So the whole process of the digital logic shaping discrete abstract units. This is digitization, the first COG, and then streamlining these units in a way that continuous programming is possible. This means you basically have to decontextualize processes from their environments they are embedded in. However, if you want people to deal with these processes, or also nowadays with the technology, the people themselves, by applying signifying practices based on digital literacy, need to recontextualize it. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense to themselves. So I don't, again, want to say, this is of course, this is my main message behind, but I don't want to address it and to highlight it too much. I'm not saying that contextualization comes without any cost for the people. It might be both, it might be arduous, it might be difficult. However, it might be also very easy, so that you don't even understand that it is not yourself who is programming a process, but you are just necessarily co-programming processes which are programmed by, for example, the algorithms, or today, of course, primarily the algorithms. And you just have to compulsorily follow them. So by co-programming and recontextualization, I don't mean that people are more empowered. So it might be right the opposite, even though they might actually feel empowered because they are not dealing maybe with pressures of other people. And this gives you an idea of being actually liberated, even though it is not really the case. So this was just to quickly introduce this approach of social digitalization, in which my ideas on augmented and reduced realities are embedded in. So what I want to do now is that I want to turn to the term augmented reality. And then I want to look at settings. So I just said that I look at digitalization beyond digital technology, and I want to look at some settings which are not applying the early settings. They don't apply digital technology. However, I want to demonstrate that we can regard them as digitalized anyway. And then I want to turn to my example, the case. I have a case example of the famous restaurant in Spain, in Ibiza, the restaurant Sublimotion. And it was the first, or one of the first restaurants which applied intensively and extensively augmented reality. So we want to turn to this case, and I want just to apply this theory and to find out what sense we can make of regarding augmented reality when we look at this case. And actually my argument is that the augmented reality, the so-called augmented reality they introduce, is based on a reduced reality in interaction they have also implemented in this restaurant, and otherwise it wouldn't even work. So that the augmented reality goes hand in hand with the reduced reality we also see in the setting. And the setting itself is also heavily digitalized without the augmented reality. But because it is heavily digitalized, the setting itself and the interaction order in the setting itself is heavily digitalized. So it was just possible to implement these augmented reality kind of on top of it. And I don't want to highlight this point, but I just want to inform you for whatever reason. So I'm not highlighting the prices, but it is the highest price restaurant in the world. And just to give you any idea, if you don't have the idea, the prices are rising, and I think they are now between 2,500 and 3,000 euro per person. I mean, it is not maybe where one just, this is not even possible. You can't just decide and have a quick lunch, join there, have a quick lunch. It is not even possible, by the way, even if you would spend the money. I mean, I'm not highlighting the money, just to give you a perspective, but it actually requires that you come very intensively also prepared, you know. Of course, you only come on when you are scheduled, and this is also a very complicated process. And I think you also, despite it is quite expensive, I think right now you wait like 1 year if you can even arrive there because of the reservations. The reservations, they have an incredible long list for the reservations. So I come to my first point. My time is already over. But I can go quickly over it. So I just want to put any conventional and short definition of augmented reality. So I just want to recall you. I'm not criticizing Adam Greenfield. This is a definition from Radical Technologies, Adam Greenfield, as you see. I just want to use a definition which is very conventional. This means you see them again and again and again, also from other authors. So, and my point is that when it comes to augmented reality, it is often defined as a technology which is superimposing the information, or they also highlight that it has a graphic overlay and it plans the cues of the environment, of the kind of real environment, and of these graphic overlays. So what is important to me is now to work with the three terms: superimposing, overlay, and blending. So because this is what usually defines augmented reality. And I want to challenge these terms, by the way. I mean, what comes now is I'm challenging it. If this is really the characteristic of augmented reality. And I want to just quickly recall you at the loudspeaker. To me, the loudspeaker is overlaying and superimposing sound. As long as one is not hearing impaired, obviously, you can't blend it out. If you have a loudspeaker, so it is, I mean, the sounds are just there, and they can be also, they can be louder than the sounds of the environment. In any case, you can't just blend it out. It also gives me an idea of something which is much more older when it comes to augmented reality. And also, no, I should say also, I mean, with all the computer, it is a word from Bolton and Kusin, a term, they call it a windowed framing. And of course, we also had kind of windowed views by reading books already almost 500 years ago. This is a book wheel, and it was, as you see, I mean, early invented, and it holds up to 12 books, and you could read these books at the very same time. So you could just easily take turns between these books, and so what gives you the chance to make comparisons, and it is a kind of windowed mode of representation, what is also regarded only as typical for the computerized world. And then, of course, what I've already talked about on Wednesday, a supermarket using augmented reality technology. However, here you have a blended environment. You have these superimposed, or you have this rather, this is not superimposed, this is a loudspeaker, but you have these overlaid signs if you want. But the signs give you information, basically, which you could have asked a clerk before. I mean, if I mean, they don't have any more information that might be also just conveyed by a clerk, or particular by a producer of the food. So there isn't anything else, you know. I mean, it is like, to me, why I'm showing it again is it is a kind of reduced reality, because if you could talk to persons about the products, particular about with the producers themselves, so of course you also would get these additional information from them. I'm coming to, this is just to challenge the definition of augmented reality. And I do want just quickly to recall on some other technologies, not old technology, in this case, the steam train, which made for a kind of augmented reality. This means it changed the ways we were seeing. It changed the perception styles, as I call it. And this is a painting, as we see, from William Turner. And it says, I mean, the title is Rain, Steam, and Speed. I made a mistake here. Sorry for that. This should be here. So this is the title, Rain, Steam, and Speed. And it just visualizes what we also learn from art history, of course, and from the introduction of impressionist painters, that once people sat in a steam train, they had the idea that the environment is just a streak or just a blur, and they can't identify objects. However, they had a totally different impression, and they also made sense out of this impression, out of their changed views. And I think also something which is add-on, no, sorry. I mean, I want to make another point. This is the next slide. There's another thing. It is, but actually it is an add-on. We know already from early on, this is a picture from 1928, but we know that in the midst of the 19th century, it was already introduced that people who were now already bored by looking out of the window, maybe a few were bored, they turned to reading. And they also, from the midst of the 19th century, at all the train station, first in Paris and in London, not all of the train station, they could also borrow books and return the books on the next train station. So they had the train, the transportation, and at the same time, they also had the reading capacities. So this was also a kind of overlay. And what we see here, this is the first class lounge, and it is not by chance. I mean, we can compare it with the third class coaches a little bit earlier, but they didn't change in that time period very much. So when we compare it with the third class coaches, And what we know from description, historical description, is that here people didn't read. In the third class coaches, they didn't read. They did intensively communicate. They did chat with each other. And they sit very tightly together. And these were people usually in the third class coaches who wouldn't read at home either, or maybe who weren't even quite able to read. But however, so there was a very vibrant interaction between them. And sometimes they didn't even suffer from that they were tightly sitting together, but they were enjoying being surrounded by strangers and have opportunities, as I call it, a live entertainment program. So they enjoyed a live entertainment program, while it was very characteristic that people in the first class, and they read and they didn't talk to each other anymore. So they were now kind of confined and really focused on their reading, and it was regarded as inappropriate to talk to each other and or to being noisy. And of course you sit very comfortably, but at the same time you sit with the individual seat, so you sit also kind of isolated from each other. And this was even more the case already in 1924. This is a picture from 1938. So they introduced the cinema train. And here you said in that way. So it is very interesting. 100 years ago, what we don't have today, to my knowledge, I don't know these trains, you had coaches in the train where you could watch movies. And you have these single seats, and they are all directed to the stage, to the screen in this case. And of course, they were not supposed to talk. They were also not supposed to look out of the window. So they were already like how I feel right now. I'm sitting alone in the room and I'm talking into technological device, you know. I mean, this was a totally different situation than the situation when, particularly in the third class coaches, where people just mingled and talked to each other. My next example, just to quickly recall, is you see this is from Berlin, the famous Alexanderplatz. This means place of Alexander from 1936, but it was already famous before, like 20 years before. And what is new here, that you have also a kind of superimposing and overlaying lighting advertisement. So they introduced from 1900 onwards, and it is famously described, by the way, by Georg Simmel and in his article, The Metropolis. And here he described how different the experiences were, and what also contributed, apart from that there were much more traffic now by the cars, but still the horse carriages, numerous pedestrians, the buses, and so many traffic. By the way, I see just, and I mean, I'm just aware that it has these really bad flags, so I'm only seeing it now. What I wanted to show is the light advertisement. So I take another movie, another slide. In any case, what we have is the lightning, and so the urban environments, they are now what they didn't, so that they weren't before, they are now lighted. And this is also superimposing. And I think this is an example already from the very same time, this 1920s, so and 1910s already, that we have a screening by movies. It is silent movie, and at the same time you have a piano player providing music. So this is, of course, like what we would call a hybrid or blended environment nowadays. That you have a present person providing the sound, and at the same time you have the screens. This is what I'm doing maybe right now as well. So my next slide. So now, now I will turn to Subdemotion Ibiza. And the point I want to make is what I've said earlier, that I do think that implementing digital technology, what they did in Subdemotion, in this restaurant, required that the interaction setting was already digitalized before. So they had a digitalized interaction order. And I also think that it contributes what I said earlier, that you can't just show up in this restaurant. For example, you also have to book in, and it is an elaborate process to book you in and to choose among a time slot available, so you can't come at any time. And this is also because of the very high, it demands a very high preparation. So you can't just eat at a time of your convenience. Of course, you can only eat when this program is kind of carried out for you. And actually it is carried out as we see in these. This is a kind of like an advertisement. V.com is a Spanish website which is designed to talk about famous touristic spots in Spain. And they say during this theatrical gastronomic show, 12 lucky diners, so it is not for one person, it's always for 12, feast on avant-garde cuisine. So they also have Michelin stars. They have 2 Michelin stars, so it is also regarded as a high cuisine and as an event as such, because of these of the fact that they have Michelin stars. So, but also they have this high-tech interactive space called capsule. So they are in a room which is like a capsule. So the 12 people can't go out. So it has to be 12 people, but they can just join at the spot, of course. So it is not done for 2 people or for 3 people. It is always for 20 people. So it is done once a day at a specific time. And it is interactive. So the people are not only left with the food, as in a supermarket or augmented reality supermarket, but they are also waiters and waitresses. And they are more like performers and actors and actresses or dancers. And this capsule serves as a blank canvas. This means the walls can be transformed. These are actually screens, and you can project on these screens whatever you want, whatever images, sounds, and whatever you want. So this is just to introduce the Subdemotion. And to me, it sounds with the 12 happy diners. First of all, it doesn't even sound like a restaurant, but we can recall something earlier than the restaurant, the table d'hôte, the host table, as it was common earlier before, that people gathered for lunch or for dinner at the host table. Table d'hôte is like the owner of the table d'hôte provides the food and provides the food for everybody, the very same food. So there are no menus, so you can choose. You can just show up at a specific time, and you have to compile together with the other diners. You don't know who is present at that time, and you eat the food which is provided on this particular day by the host. So it was only later on. This is a table d'hôte lunch menu still from 1900, and you see that at 1900 So they just indicated what is there for lunch and this particular day. So there's no choices offered. It was only, I mean, some restaurants earlier than 1900, what is the case with these menus, and around 1900, that menus were introduced. And what is unfortunately not really visible, so you also see on these exemplary menu cards that they say meals are served for one person. So you can order from it, but only for one person at the time. So this means these are my discrete abstract units. You know, you have a certain portion you can order, you can choose from a variety. It is served to you on a single plate for one person. So you're not going to share, but you can choose. You pay for each single item on the menu, and they also provide on the menu, they indicate at which time you can come and at which time you can get this hot food. So it is not, I mean, it is much more formalized already. And this is what we also see here. This is the typical restaurant at the time, around 1900. And what was also newly introduced is that you have the single tables and you have waiters serving the single tables, waiting for the customers. So what I want to emphasize here is that you have the restaurant is much more formalized compared to the table d'hôte, but at the same time, you also can run your own program. At least you can come when you want. You can come at how many people you want. You don't need to compulsory mingle with the other people. So one party or each party is served individually. You can choose from the menu, and you also know, for example, in advance how much it will cost. But you still have options to program, which these options, this is my point, you don't have in Sublimation, in the augmented reality restaurant. So this is how it looks like in the kitchen. So everything is coordinated. So the eaters, they eat what is served to them. However, Michelin star cuisine level. However, everything needs to be programmed in advance. Also in the kitchen, they need to coordinate when the eaters can eat what. And so this is the star chef we see here. And also in the course when they prepare the food, so they need the augmented technology. I just want to quickly show you a few pictures, so just to give you an impression of the walls and what we have said. So you have the 12 eaters gathered around one table, and the walls can project whatever, and also the lighting and the sound. Everything is programmed, but you can put the diners in whatever mood you might think is now appropriate. Appropriate, not according to the diners, but appropriate according to the food you serve. So the idea is that the food is served with an accompanying, in previous times in a restaurant, it was an accompanying wine, but now it is served with an accompanying sound and with an accompanying lightning and with an accompanying show to enhance seemingly the gustatory experience of the food. So this is how the 12 diners arrive, and these are a few impressions, and you see the changing environment and also the changing food. All courses are served in a very different environment and also in a very different style. I mean, also the physical, the material and the physical space is always changing. So the material, what is used, the dishes, and the way they serve it. And so, for example, here also the table itself can project things. And here like flying balloons, and they can come from the ceiling, and they also contain some food, which the diners then has to get out of these balloons. Sometimes, so they also make additional kind of plays or a tasting with additional visions. So, and they are using these augmented reality classes. Or you have like a garden on your table. So this is more physical, and you pick your food from the garden, and you are kind of instructed by the waiters, and they explain to you how to make best sense out of this dish. However, it is still you, this is my argument, to make sense of all these courses, and also of the succession of all these courses, and of the whole environment. So my idea is, of course, you also need to know, for example, here, what does the landscape indicate to you? And why is it served like you are strolling through a garden and just pick whatever you can find? But in another case, so what does it mean when you have the instruction from a screen? You don't see the food right away. This is why it's opposite. So you open it, you have a surprise, and you need to program. What does it mean? And it has to be meaningful. This is my assumption in any way. Otherwise, people wouldn't go there, you know, I mean, wouldn't line up going there. So of course it is meaningful to them in any way, but it requires, of course, I mean, this is my point, digital literacy to get meaning out of it. This is the very end. So this is how it ends, with a kind of firework. And then you go out, and I think it is like 2 hours. It is two or 2.5 hours. So it is not really such an extended time for all the courses. And I mean, finally, I will end now. And I just want to put my argument. So I try to just visualize it at the very end. And my idea is, so I said, I do think that digitalization, social digitalization, comes on increasing levels. And I just want to apply it to augmented and reused reality. And I do think that the digital logic causes the discontinuous, both continuous and discontinuous processing we have seen on the first graphic. And it reduced reality, first of all, because it diminishes contingencies in the interaction order. At the same time, you can then implement technology, and these together changes the perception style, so that, for example, you can perceive it as augmented reality because you have a reduced reality, which has now overlaid science by technology, and it might be augmented reality. However, so my last point, but quite important to me, is that the new perception styles, like in the train, or like with a loudspeaker, or like in the movie theater, so we don't perceive it anymore, of course, or like in Simmel's Metropolis, we don't perceive it anymore as exciting or superimposed science. So it becomes really very conventionalized. We perceive it as the real reality. Like, I mean, of course, I don't want to make the point that there's anything like a real reality. What I want to say is that real reality is just a reality which is conventionalized by us. So we take it for granted. It is familiar to us. And this is why we think it is reality, real reality. And I do think that, for example, the Subdemotion restaurant, which is now regarded as augmented reality, might be perceived in 10 years like a normal reality, ordinary reality. And then it starts again, you know, from these kind of platform. I mean, to also use the signature term of this conference, you can again apply a digital logic. So you can again shape these continuous processing. Then you have a reduced reality again. You can implement technology. You might perceive it as augmented reality until then it becomes conventionalized. And this is what goes on and on. And my final sentence and my main argument is that it already went on and on in the past 150 years. So that we became just conventionalized to our new perceptions at a certain time period. And only from there on, we had the perception of augmentation, which vanished over time. So looking at the clock, I should definitively stop here. And I would, of course, thank you very, very much for your attention over all this time. And I'm very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kornelia, for your thought-provoking presentation. I think that for sure it arouses way a lot of questions. And now I just give the floor to Francesca Comunello, that is our discussant for today. So Francesca, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Kornelia, for your speech, for your insightful speech. I mean, you some very important, so I'm really grateful for that. And I would like to
okay, now I hear you. I was
focus your attention.
Yeah, Francesca, may you please start again, because there was a lag and the connection wasn't good at all, okay?
Okay.
But I think you haven't yet started with the question, so I don't know if it was only me who didn't understand it.
No, yes, it is. I mean, Francesca has a question. Francesca has a question, please.
Yes, then please. I need a repetition. I
was thanking you, and I will spare you this part again, but it was really interesting. And well, I would have many questions, but we are running out of time. So I would just focus on the role of the user, meaning the ways in which people involved in this kind of environments negotiate with technologies, with platform affordances, and so on. You mentioned the idea that this kind of reality might become our ordinary reality. But of course, in this, we need digital literacy, of course, but we also need that people make sense somehow of what they are experiencing, which is quite similar to what we do in every kind of environment. I mean, even in physical environments, like you showed us, like the squares, the trains, and so on. So it's not only a question of digital environments, but of environments in my experience. And in this, I would like to ask you, what is the role of first of all, of the user as a single entity, and also the role of social norms, shared social usage norms and cultural norms that we need to build in order to transform this kind of reality in ordinary reality. On the other hand, there is also a role exerted by design processes, where again, we are not only dealing with technical issues, but of course there is a part of the social and cultural environments that play a role in the design processes, meaning, I mean, designers are human beings, so they have their standpoints, their cultural, social, cultural, economical, blah, blah, blah standpoints on the one hand. And on the other hand, you mentioned algorithms, and indeed in all these artificial intelligence systems, algorithmic systems, and so on, we do not only have the role of designers, the designer standpoints, and so on, but of course we also have social and cultural considerations that retroact somehow with these systems, as these systems learn from data, and data are produced by humans. And so we really have a complex mutual shaping process to observe here. So that maybe it's a long question, but that would be my question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Francesca. It is also like a very good comment, of course. I mean, it is not, so I don't disagree to anything, but I just to answer it more specifically, so I'm very happy. Thank you very much for the questions. I think the role of the user is these, what I would call recontextualization. So for example, you have the algorithm, and the algorithm work decontextualized, otherwise it wouldn't work. And but the algorithm can't work alone by them. So, of course, you need the user who makes sense out of them. And I think it is a very good point you addressed, that the algorithms are designed by human beings. So also they have put some ideas in how they should work. And I think the problem can arise out of it. I mean, nobody of us wants to just return to non-digital technology anymore. So this is not my point, to say, okay, just let's return and the digital technology is bad. So not at all. However, I do think that when we were frequently confronted with like digitalization, as this will salvage us, and of course it is out of question that whenever we digitalize anything, it will be just brilliant and wonderful. So I don't think that this is the case. So we should make also sense of it. What do we want to digitalize, in what way, and but first of all, what is the output of it? I mean, this should be the main focus. What is the output? If we do it less digitalized, maybe the output might be even better. So, but returning to the designers, so they also kind of embed cultural norms and cultural concepts, and as I like to call it, they embed cultural concepts when they design the algorithm. And I also do think that the users, they have to provide or to supply their sense making, the capacity. So this is the interaction we were talking of, and you also highlighted that it is an interaction. And I do think that when it comes to recontextualized on part of the users, so they also ascribe cultural norms or social norms. So it is not just the digital environment digitalized only by technology. And I mean, the first example, because we have research on it in Salzburg, the first example which comes into my mind is that research shows that the digital dating apps, so we are looking at the users using digital dating apps, but the way they interpret these use, it is not, I mean, it's what we see, it is often, sometimes not, sometimes it is often the case that they apply romantic love. They find a partner by digital dating apps, and the relationship is starting, and then they quit. So they break up on grounds that they now feel it was not romantic enough the way they met. I mean, it is kind of paradox, but I mean, it is interesting to see that I'm not talking of 100%. I mean, other people, they have other patterns and they shape relationships, of course, but there's also a group who breaks up on this ground, what seems really paradox. However, it is a good example to me that the sense-making patterns, they can stem heavily from cultural norms, and they don't stem from the technology itself. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think we have more questions, and I should. Is it okay, Francesca? Is it?
Sure, it is okay. And even the final example you made about dating apps is really relevant. I mean, I'm also doing research on these topics, and we highlighted similar patterns like traditional, you know, gender roles and gender scripts and dating scripts are at stake even when negotiating with digital dating app platforms. So it's really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Another interaction and endless source of for analysis. Yeah, I'm happy to, maybe we can cooperate on this. Okay.
Sure, would be interesting. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question, Cornelia. I have to say your presentation and the example of the subliminal was like literally mind-blowing. And so I have two questions. First one is related to the human-non-human interaction in this process of augmented and reduced reality. Like, it looks like we have a trend at the moment of technology as an element of luxury, like the ultimate technology equals to the ultimate luxury. But at the very end, in the future, probably the trend will be right the opposite, because like the human interaction could be perceived as a form of luxury. I'm thinking about think about the world of healthcare and like people who couldn't afford psychoanalysis care, and they do have to relate with bot instead of with a professional doctor, as an example. And the second part of my question is related to the nothing something theory, which you also comment greatly in your book, and is related to the idea of the process of digitalization could be perceived as a form of nothing. But according to what you said, to your study, your evidence, I think it's coming more and more as really something, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, these are really great questions. Thank you very much, Pier Giorgio. And I mean, I start with the last one, and because I've already, I do think that, I mean, I myself, I didn't even see it in so closely related as you put it right now, my digitalization approach or social digitalization approach related to nothing and something. And if I should relate to this pattern, then digitization and the continuous processing, the programming, this leads to nothing. However, then it is the users who need to supply the sense making, and they have to turn it into something as a compulsory task for them to do. Or if they don't want to do it, they can't just use the technology. And I think this also brings us to your first question, which is really very good, because I mean, this is my whole argument, that we shouldn't focus so much on the technology itself. And what we see in Subdemotion, this is clearly luxury, because hardly anybody, even if they would like to participate, hardly anybody can just afford it, you know, to dine there, and also, I mean, to have the trip. And so only a very small social group can afford it. And I do think that at the same time, we can implement augmented reality when it comes to healthcare. And this is, of course, not a luxury experience. So here we even have, I mean, I want to distinguish augmented reality and how it relates to reduced reality. And here we clearly have a reduced reality compared to being examined by a physical doctor, you know, and by a professional, and being, I mean, your body being examined, touched, and you have the, you might be not time restricted and whatever. And of course, this is a reduced reality, and it is not luxury. This is a makeshift. This is a makeshift for poorer social classes who might not be able, might not be insured, don't have a health insurance, or can't afford the private health insurance, and the welfare. On Wednesday, we also talked about the welfare, and I think we can closely relate it. So, and the welfare is system doesn't provide the service anymore. I mean, reduces its services to these. I mean, I like to put it in that way. It is a reduced service by using augmented reality. But of course, nothing is really augmented in the experience, maybe. Even though I'm not totally against introducing any digital technology in the health service. So in some situations, it might be kind of beneficial. But my point is, you really have to check what sense does it make, and is it beneficial, and for who? Of course, in most cases, it is very beneficial for those who save money, you know, and or make more money. I mean, if it is business driven, so it might be very effective, of course, very efficient, and it makes a lot of sense. But you need to see all the users involved in it, and there might be users for which it doesn't make any sense at all. And among the users, there might be also different social groups. For one group, it might make more sense than for another group. And this is my what my theory includes. So you need to check out all the different groups and to analyze.
Absolutely, we will, and we will develop further discussion and debate about the nothing something, if you wish, in the future days. But yeah, I have also to strongly suggest your book, because I think it is really great, and I suggest to the audience your book. I just give the word to Gillette, which has her hand raised, and I mute my mic. So Gillette, go ahead.
Hi, Kornelia. Thanks. That was a great presentation. And I appreciated how you've sort of really historically contextualized what we see as quite new today. In fact, I was in some ways reminded of the Zemelian Blase attitude a bit when we were speaking of the reduced reality. How central is this reduced reality aspect when it comes to this framework of social digitalization that you've developed? And secondly, how closely do you think it is tied to the parameter of class?
Great questions. And I think I should also answer, but unfortunately, briefly, or unfortunately for me, maybe not for you, but I think the reduced reality, it is basically this discontinuous processing is just causes a reduced reality because it decontextualizes. So, and it diminishes or eliminates sometimes, properly eliminates contingencies of processes. And this is a reduced reality to me. But at the same time, so this is kind of the description of an interaction order. It is not how it is different. This is your second question. By different social classes, it can be perceived differently. And I'm sure the people who have also spent a lot of money in sub emotion, maybe they leave the restaurant and they are just overwhelmed and excited and happy and whatever, and they don't mind that they have spent all the money. And but it might be also perceived as a overkill of symbols, and that you are like the early people in the train. So they felt early on, they felt like it is always described as a projectile. They are shot, or like a parcel. I mean, this transport, they are now, they are treated like a parcel. They are just shot from one place to another place. And for them, so it was only 30 kilometers an hour, the first trains, but it was incredibly fast. So what we can't imagine anymore, but it was incredibly fast. And they felt like they were shot from one place to another, you know, and so the experience were very differently. And this is exactly my point. So I also strongly promote when it comes to social digitalization and to digitalization, we don't, this is another aspect why we shouldn't focus on technology alone, because the technology can cause very different experiences according to the previous experiences in different social classes.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Also, a great interest in the physical classrooms. We have a question for you by Geraldina Roberti, which you can see now on camera.
Okay. Thank you, Kornelia. Thank you for your speech, very inspiring. So I'd like to know, augmented reality takes away from postmodern consumers their most essential opportunity. So the possibility to choose freely, because they have to adapt to a sort of rules, like you show us for this restaurant. So it couldn't be perceived as a step back from the power, from the consumer's power in this sense.
Yeah, I mean, you are talking of consumer power, and I do think this is ambivalent. This kind of ambivalent. The consumer perceives a lot of, might feel very powerful because of the idea that you have, that you can choose between, for example, a great variety of commodities. I mean, the commodities nowadays, they are more and more digitalized in a way. You can purchase commodities in single items. It is packaged, so it is up to the point, I describe these in the book, up to the point that you buy since 100 years almost, in Europe it is a little bit later, that you can buy meat in perfectly equal sized, standardized sized packages. What is really, I mean, a huge problem also, but it is really not obvious given the point that you are selling parts of an animal. I mean, I don't want to go into the discussion of the ethical discussion on eating meat or growing meat and these things. But it is, of course, very funny that it comes in standardized packages. I mean, even funnier than the canned food with beans or whatever, you know. At the same time, and of course, this is a clearly a reduction. And at the same time, people might, this is what we know also from the studies, that once they wrapped the meat in this standardized and this transparent wrapping, and people felt kind of empowered in that way, the consumers, that they didn't need to take whatever was offered to them, maybe at the butcher's counter or behind the counter and already wrapped in a paper. They couldn't really see it anymore. And now they clearly see it, they can inspect it, and they can choose between different packages, even if they are all look alike. We once had made an observation in a supermarket among customers, and they also carefully choose when it comes to meat, particularly between these very equal looking packages, and at least they take it in their hand and then they turn it around and they switch it and they look. I mean, there isn't a lot of things they can really from which they can smell it. Fortunately, this is an appeal of this way of selling meat, but they can't really inspect the quality, but they are still doing things with these packages. They are handling these packages in a certain kind of way. And I do think that these makes at least consumers feel empowered. So it is ambivalent. So this would be my answer. The consumer feels empowered, but often the case it is the great variety consumers have. It's just because it's more digitalized and more profitable to sell it in that
Thank
way.
you very much, Cornelia. Even Laura has a good question.
Yes, shall I come there? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. So
Okay, can you?
they can see you and listen.
Can you hear me, Kornelia?
Yes, yeah, I hear you and I see you. No, not now. I don't hear you. I don't know what. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you.
So I wanted to thank you a lot for your presentation because it was really contextualized also historically and it was really thought-provoking. And so actually the question I was thinking about, you kind of already answered to it, but if you could just try to go more in deep. So I'm talking about the affordance of the consequences of this self-influence between augmented and real reality that you were talking about before. So this reciprocal adaptation as well. So within this discourse, for sure, digital divide is fundamental and crucial and really linked to the affordance issue, which will also mean that there will be a connection to fundamental rights and services like care, health, and so on and so forth, as you were saying before. So the reduced augmented reality you were talking about, which is a really interesting critic vision, I think. And I was thinking about also some new social tensions that can result from this digital divide, but also this really contrasting relationship between the augmented and the real reality. So what about the possible new social tensions in the realm of consumption, but also beyond? So if you also thought about this issue in this context. Thank you.
Yes, very good question and also very difficult question because I think there are already, as you summarized very well, that when it comes to reduced and augmented reality, so we have an interplay, and on top we also have different approaches and experiences of different consumers. So they don't perceive every environment in the same way alike, you know. I mean, they might perceive it reduced or augmented, and at the same time, from the perspective of the interaction order, it might be also more or less augmented or reduced, depending on which contingencies are still allowed. So we have like already two dimensions, two spectrums, which, and in between, and I mean, as a graphic, we have like two lines, two spectrums, and we have a whole space, so with a lot of empirical variations in between. And now you are asking me beyond these. So actually, the third dimension, of course, which I already mentioned, is that it has increasing levels. You know, what is regarded by consumers as augmented today, maybe in 10 years, is regarded as reduced. For example, I can still recall when there were an introduction of the first screens in the 1980s. And it was already like incredible, or the phones with a picture, you know, and then they disappeared. Now we have them again. But also the first computer games. So they were really very attractive. So the design was very simple compared to what we have today. And we would clearly perceive it, or a lot of people perceive it as reduced, even though there are a few people who really like this vintage design, you know, and there is a whole group of people, I'm not really very familiar with it, I'm not an expert on it, but who really like to also play these games from the 1980s because of this vintage appeal. Yeah, so we have actually 3 dimensions. So there's an interaction order, which can be more or less augmented or reduced. There are the experiences of the users, which can tend to being augmented or reduced, or also a clear combination of it from on the part of the consumers. And we also have the an augmentation and reduction on increasing levels. So if we put it in a timeline, so what at one time period within a cultural context was augmented might become reduced. And of course, this is also, there's no equal share around the globe. So there might be also regional differences. What was augmented in one region at one time might already be reduced, while it is still regarded as augmented in a different region. Mm-hmm. Even though with globalization, I don't think that the regional differences might not be so much anymore. But this would be even a 4th dimension.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kornelia. We knew your contribution would have arisen a great interest. So that's why we invited you here as a guest in Bologna in May. And so we will complete the event when you will be here in presence. And we are just delighted of having you in an augmented version as soon as you could come in Bologna. We really appreciate your contribution. Now we'll take a break. And thank you very much, Kornelia.
Yeah, thank you very much for your attention and for all the great questions. And I'm very much looking forward to resume the discussion in May. Okay, for sure we will. We will keep the room open. We have a coffee break. Yes, have a good break. Yeah. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I would like to yes, of course. Online, but I have another. Later. Thank you, Francesca. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Now we have to take a break. So if you